Be kind to yourself, man. Be kind to yourself. I wish I could go back and give. I've studied hypnosis a little bit, and there's some therapeutic hypnosis stuff where you basically have the current you go back and meet the child version of you and embrace the child version of you. And I always tell people, it's like, listen, you might like, would you treat that 6-year-old the way you treat you now? Of course you wouldn't. You would never treat a child the way that we treat ourselves and the way that we judge ourselves for whatever else. But for the kids, be kind to yourself. There's nothing wrong with you. It's hard. I know what it's like in there, and it's horrible and it's difficult, and you try as hard as you can. You're dealing with people who are wondering why, like my brother would say, why can't you just sit still? There's nothing wrong with you. You're going to have to work a little bit harder, but you can, at least you're getting, I couldn't get help when I was a kid, right? I like nobody in my, the only kid that got diagnosed ADHD in my school was this kid, James Bent, who was way more than ADHD. I mean, I still know the guy. He's a good guy, but he was way out there in this way. But you had to be that severe to get any kind of help at all.
Welcome to the Soaring Child podcast, where parents of children with ADHD learn tips and tricks to help their child soar at home, at school, and in life. We feature interviews with experts, medical professionals, and parents just like you, who are learning how to reduce ADHD symptoms using food and other natural strategies. Because children with ADHD deserve to soar just like every other child. I'm Dana Kay, your host. Now it's time to welcome Chris Haddad to the Soaring Child. And Chris, I just realized that I pronounce your last name in a different way.
Fine. You pronounce it whatever way you want. Haddad, as we were just discussing, it's Haddad when I'm in Massachusetts, and it's Hadad everywhere else because people cannot say Haddad except for in Massachusetts. It's the strangest thing.
It's not the strangest thing. My name in America is pronounced Dana, but in Australia it's pronounced Dana.
That's
so
true. Yes.
I hear you. I get it all the time. Well, thank you so much for joining us
You're
today.
Very welcome. Just tangentially, one of my favorite experiences ever was I was in court for something actually related to ADD and other things. I got arrested at Burning Man years ago because of stuff like this. And I was in court for that in Nevada. And the judge kept asking me how to pronounce my name over and over again. And they could not get it. And so my lawyer was just like, it's fine, whatever they say. I'm like, yeah.
Oh my gosh. No, I know the feeling. Everywhere I go, it's no one gets my name. But when I met you in Phoenix at a conference recently, I knew straight away that I wanted you to come on my podcast. And so I just got my nerves up. I picked myself up and I went over and I asked you. And so, this is going to be a very different interview than what I've done in the past. But your story really inspired me. And I know that it's going to inspire so many of our listeners out there, of parents that have kids that are currently suffering with ADHD. You are an extremely successful man. And, I want you to tell the listeners
despite my brain doing everything it could to keep me from becoming successful over the many, many years that I've been doing this. Yeah, it's been a journey. That's for sure.
Yeah, but you've overcome it, and you've really fought through that. So why don't you just firstly, talk a little bit about what you do in this world today? Not about the mental health or ADHD just yet, but let them know what it is you do.
So I've had a weird career. I started off when I was younger thinking I was going to go write television shows in Hollywood. And then I went to Hollywood and had a bunch of crazy things happen and discovered I hated it there. The short version is these days, I'm 45 now, I'll be 45 next month. I'm known as one of the best direct response copywriters in the world. I feel egotistical saying that, but everybody else says it too. So I might as well just repeat what they say. I'm known particularly for emotion and storytelling in copy. You saw me give a speech about such things not that long ago.
Yes.
And I also have another identity. I have a whole other version of things I do who doesn't wear this hat I have on, named Michael Fiore. And he is an internationally known relationship expert who I created 10 or 11 years ago. And I went on the Rachel Ray show and I wrote some best-selling books and I built an 8-figure business out of that. And then life, the shit hit the fan life-wise and all sorts of crazy things happened that I'm sure we'll get into. But that's kind of the short version of it. I'm just now in the last year or so back to work after dealing with a lot of physical and mental health issues along the way. So.
Wow. And you are an amazing copywriter. And the storytelling is just phenomenal. And definitely, from what I've read, that's probably your superpower.
I would guess so. Yeah, I think my superpower, because I do deal with ADHD. I also deal with bipolar 2, which I didn't know for 39 years. I'm 45 now, so that's a whole thing. That was difficult, not knowing that for so long. But I think that people ask me why I'm good at what I do and why I'm good at the empathy side of things, particularly. And I think it's just because ADHD and bipolar, it heightens everything, right? Everything is heightened in some way. The torture in your head is heightened all the time. Like not being able to sit still, not being able to deal with things, not being able to emotionally regulate for a really long time. I think going through all that, plus I got hit by a semi truck at one point, and I dealt with Lyme disease for years and years and years. And my dad died when I was 19, all these kind of things, right? So like what I always teach my students and such is like, listen, you've got everything you need inside of you to understand everyone around you, right? Like we are all just humans and we are all in pain and we all think we're imposters and we all think we suck. And we're just afraid to admit that to the world, but it's true. And so one of my greatest joys in life is being able to go out there and be like, yeah, I've made millions of dollars. I've done this, I've done that. And I still have all the same shit everybody else does, maybe even a little bit worse. Basically, but it's been quite the journey. I talked to my wife about this, and I always say every day is a bonus day. You've been through enough crap, and again, I'm not complaining. I know people that have been through way worse things than I could even conceive of going through. But everybody goes through their particular journey. But I think one of the cool things about being 45 now is I love people in their 40s because people just in their 40s just aren't bothered as much by things anymore. Like something goes wrong and you're just like the joke I have about this that I think encapsulates it is when you're a young man, when you're like 22 years old and you're walking down the street somewhere and you figure out that your fly is down, you go, oh my God, my fly is down. And you're a little embarrassed and you try to hide, which actually makes it a bigger deal. When you're 45 and your fly is down, because I often forget to zip my fly for some reason, you just zip your fly up. You just don't care. You just
you keep going on your way.
Yeah, don't even think about it. You don't feel embarrassed. Nothing goes on there. You're just like, yeah, my fly was down. Big fucking.
Totally.
Is swearing okay, or should I try to be PG here?
Well, it is.
I'll do my best.
That is fine. It is adult listeners. It's not children listeners, but it is adult listeners.
I do have quite the potty mouth when I'm not paying attention, but I will do my absolute best.
No, that is okay. But it reminds me of I completely agree with you being above 40, but it's also like when you have a baby, once you've given birth, all of the embarrassment goes out the window. And no matter what happens after that, you're like, oh yeah. Like, I mean, when I gave birth, that was way worse. So
it puts things in perspective. Yeah. You go through enough real problems. It's interesting getting a bit older now. And I've had a lot of health problems, both physical and mental, and seeing my peers who have not dealt with these things yet start to hit that age where, hey, you haven't taken care of yourself for 40 years and now it's kind of hitting you, and seeing the shock they go through when they're like, oh shit, this is real. And it's like, there are actual real problems compared to, oh no, you didn't make as much money as your brother or whatever else people tend to worry about.
Yeah, no, definitely. It does. Oh, well, I don't know if it goes all downhill after 40, but there are different problems than there were previously. Yeah, now, let's talk about your mental health.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about the journey that you've been through.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I grew up in Massachusetts, central Massachusetts, pretty conservative overall, and Catholic in Massachusetts. It's very much being a boy in Massachusetts and Catholic, it was like, what's wrong? You're not allowed to need help with anything, right? You're not allowed to have mental health issues. I never got diagnosed. It was always a joke that I was ADHD for most of my life, but I would never go to a psychiatrist or get diagnosed or get meds or anything like that. And I spent most of my youth thinking I was lazy, thinking there was something wrong with me, right? Like I've always been pretty smart. I did well on the SATs. Actually, it was funny. I got like the third highest SAT scores in my school that year. And my teachers were shocked. They were just like, you're smart? We had no idea. It's like, yeah, I'm smart, but I was just bored by your classes. And my brain is going like a freaking motorcycle all the time. And like every single thought is torture, and every single, focusing on anything that I was not interested in was absolutely impossible. And so I went through, high school and got into college and all that thing, always had tremendously low self-esteem, no confidence. People see me as this very confident person now, which I always find really weird and kind of strange, because I used to have massive social anxiety and no self-esteem, and thought I would never make anything of my life whatsoever. Got fired from every job I ever had because I just could not pay attention. Had every relationship I had fall apart because I could not be present and be in the moment in any way. And it was just really, really hard. Everything was difficult. I was dealing with Lyme disease at the same time, and I didn't even know it. And it was just this I'm a very tenacious person at this point in my life. And I think it's just because everything was so hard for so long. And it's only now, being on the right meds and dealing with all the other stuff and having things kind of in the right place, then I'm like, oh, wow, it's actually a lot easier for other people. There was nothing wrong with me because there actually was something, quote unquote, wrong with me, right?
Like, yeah, and you don't know what you don't know. If that's what you're used to, you think everyone is going through the same thing as you're going through.
But the biggest thing that I learned was mental health issues are not a moral failing. Right? Because I grew up Catholic and it was very, guilt. And it's like, oh, well, you can't do this and this. And there is this feeling, I think a lot of kids who have ADHD or whatever go through, where it's like, it's your fault, or there's something wrong with you, or you're not trying hard enough, right? And all that stuff, which is just crap. It's not at all. It's not a moral failing. It's a thing in your brain. There's chemicals involved. There's things that you can do about it. But I feel like one of my favorite things in the world these days is talking to the children of friends of mine who are dealing with ADD or other things, and just sitting down with them and being like, hey, you can do this and it's okay. And there's nothing wrong with you. You just have an issue to deal with, like anybody else has to deal with anything else. Yeah.
Yeah. And most of those kids that, they receive something like 20,000 more negative messages by the time they're 18 than their atypical peers. And so, that self-esteem, especially when you're going into your teenage years, I can't even imagine what that would be like. And so when did you actually get officially diagnosed?
Yeah. So people had joked about me being ADHD forever, right? Like, before there were cell phones, I would be the guy who just would be reading a book in the corner. I would go to parties and I would have to go off in the corner by myself and just like whatever else all the time. I always had to be shoving information into my brain at any given time. The fact that I can just sit and hang out or go for a walk and not do anything is incredible to me. And the way I got finally diagnosed was, like I mentioned before, I got arrested. I went to Burning Man back in, I forget what year it was. I guess I was 31 at the time, so like 15 years ago. And I couldn't be there, right? Like I'd never been before. I had a bunch of friends. I live in Seattle, as you do. And a lot of people from Seattle go to Burning Man. And I just could not be present. And my brain was just going all the time. And I was like, I'm in this amazing place. There's all this crazy stuff going on. There's beautiful women I'd love to be flirting with. But instead, I was just in my brain the entire time. And I've never been a drug user before that. I've never been like big on that even now. But I ended up going and as shockingly to people who might be listening, people take drugs at Burning Man. I know it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy.
A lot of people don't know what Burning Man is actually.
Fair enough. It's look it up. It's a little cultish at this point. I don't know that I'll go back, but it was worth going the 2 times that I did, even though the first time was pretty crazy. Anyway, so I ended up going to a guy in my camp there, and I basically asked him for some Molly because I wanted to like connect with people, right? Molly being an MDMA, which is used therapeutically, but also used not non-therapeutically by plenty of people. And I took that and I went out and I was having a great time all night. I was making out with pretty much everybody. I felt open to the world in a way I never had before. Looking back on it now, my brain just doesn't make serotonin, right? Just the way my particular, I've had brain scans done where doctors are literally like, I'm surprised you haven't killed yourself yet. Which I was like, well, I don't know. But there was this rush. It was this weird feeling of being something close to happy for the first time in my entire life. But the short version of the story is, which is hilarious when I tell the entire thing, but would take longer than we have here. It's like a 45-minute comedy bit, basically, about the horrors of life. Is that I ended up getting railroaded by a couple undercover cops who got me to, quote unquote, sell them some of what I had, even though it's Burning Man, you don't sell anything. I just wanted to give it to them, but they like handed me like this little glowing fan thing that I did not want, right? I was like, no, I'm good. No, I'm good. No, I'm good. And eventually you just take it because you don't want to be rude, right? And then of course, 10 minutes later, I'm in handcuffs. I'm being dragged off the playa. I have pretty severe back issues from when I got hit by that semi years ago. So that was unfortunate, being handcuffed and stuck in a chair and such. I had, they basically tried to entrap me into saying that I was doing, actually the really funny bit is at one point I'm there and I'm still high as a kite, right? Like I'm on drugs. I got my arms behind me. I'm really thirsty and I have a Camelback on and I'm trying to get the hose to get into my mouth over and over again. And the detective comes in, who's this like 5'9" guy with his shirt tucked in really severely with amazing hair and whatnot. And he says, hello, my name is Detective Razor. And I'm like, really? I was like, oh my God, what an amazing name. And he read me my rights. And then he was like, all right, you've been here since Sunday. How many hundreds of these have you given out in that time? Talking about the MDMA. And I was like, hundreds, what are you talking about? Blah, 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 blah. And I was basically said, and then in my brain, I stopped and I was like, wait a minute. And in my head, I was like, Chris, you're a pretty smart guy, but right now you're on drugs and this is their job and they're good at it. And that guy just got you to admit to a lesser crime by giving you a presupposition of a greater one. And that's actually a pretty good thing to do. And you should shut the hell up right now. And so the guy was asking me, he tried to get me to talk. I'm like, no, he's like, well, you don't want to talk. I'm like, listen, man, we can talk about rainbows and puppies or whatever you want. But I think we all know that I'm not in the right mindset to have this conversation right now. So I'm just going to keep my mouth shut. And I did, which was the smartest thing I've ever done in my entire life. But for those who were listening, the cops are not your friends in that situation. Before this happened, I had always been raised like I'm a white guy. I'm Lebanese, but I'm a white guy in America, right? I never really worried about police or anything like that. And this really gave me a look at the world in a way that I had not experienced before. But going back home after that, I went to my therapist and I was just like, I need help. This is not working. Something is not working here. And that was when I got properly diagnosed with for ADHD. I got put on Strattera at the time. And it was the beginning of slowly getting my brain under control. I remember being on that for the first time and I was like, wow, there's only one song playing in my head instead of 9 right now. And then of course I found out later it wasn't just ADHD, but also bipolar 2, which it was a difficult road to kind of get to the point of having any real control. But it was interesting, when I got diagnosed, there's this weird feeling of like joy and shame at the same time in a weird way, because you know there's something going on. But it's not you anymore. It's not a moral failing. It's a thing that's kind of going on. But at the same time, it was, I don't know. I just never wanted to. The way I grew up was like, you're not allowed to have mental health issues. It was just not an okay thing. You just, in Massachusetts, you just kind of suck it up and you move on with your life, and that's just the way life is. You drink a lot, basically. That's how you deal with things.
And do you feel that thought process around mental health has changed?
I think it has in a way. I mean, it's definitely better now than it was when we were kids, right?
Yeah.
Back when I was young, it was a real stigma. I remember, if you found out a neighbor was like going to a psychiatrist or had a mental breakdown or something like that, that would be a scandal. You would judge them for it, quite honestly. Which would be,
and it's a scandal now if you're not going to a psychologist.
No, it really is, and I think that's it's good that things have been normalized to a large degree, and that it's okay to say, "Hey, I've had a hard time." I had a full-on mental breakdown 6 years ago, 7 years. Today is, I think it was last week, was the 6-year anniversary of getting diagnosed bipolar 2, which brings up a lot of emotions as well. But I had a full mental breakdown. I turned into a totally different version of myself. I did things I don't remember that people tell me about that were pretty fucked up. Excuse me, I didn't mean to swear. Damn it, I was doing so well. Yeah, and I just to get to the short of it there, it's been. I'm really happy that I'm in a position in my life where I am quote unquote successful, whatever that means. And I can go out and be very public about my struggles and show people who are younger, particularly, hey, you can do this. Like, just because you're dealing with ADHD, bipolar, schizophrenia, even whatever it is. Yeah, it's hard. It is really, really hard, but you can still reach a level of what people consider success, financial or otherwise. You can have impact on people. You can do all sorts of cool things in your life.
And listeners, that's exactly what you need to write down on your piece of paper right now. And you need to continue to tell that to your children, because, this is why I was so excited to get Chris onto the podcast, because that's the message that we need to get out there to them. That's the message that they need to hear on a regular basis, because they're not hearing that from most people.
And I didn't hear that when I was a kid either, man. Like, I didn't hear that at all. It was always like, what's wrong with you or whatever. But it's just, I know, as you said before, it comes with advantages. There's a cost and there's an advantage all the time, right? ADHD can be very, very difficult. I remember what it was like to be a kid dealing with that. But on the upside, I'm very, very quick. I'm good on stage. I'm really good on my feet. I'm pretty witty overall. Like, I have a lot of energy and things like that. There's compensations that you can get. The problem is that our society is built around this kind of puritanical Prussian education idea of like, get in the chair and sit in that chair all day so we can train you to go work at a factory. Well, I was never going to be a guy who was going to work at a factory or be okay in an office. And the misery in my life came from all the years where I was trying to force myself to be a person that I was never going to be. And the joy in my life and the success in my life came when, because I got fired from every other job I ever had, I was forced to go out and become an entrepreneur and become a copywriter and figure it out on my own. So
and that's amazing. And you are an amazing copywriter, an amazing entrepreneur. Did you feel when you were a child and you're going through all of this, did you feel that you were different, or did you feel that you were being treated differently than other kids in your family or your school?
I always felt very, my buddy Dan's sister commented on something. I posted a speech on my Facebook called "If I Wasn't Rich, I'd Be Dead," where I go through my entire kind of life story and all the things that go through it. And she watched it and she said that she was proud of me, which was nice. But she also said she always remembered me as this like shy outsider kid, because she's a teacher, right? She's like a young like educator for young people. And that was totally what it was. And, at the time I thought I was being ostracized. Now I realize I was the one ostracizing myself, right? Like I've talked to all these kids that I thought hated me when I was young and whatever else. And they were like, no, you were just kind of weird and antisocial and didn't really talk to anybody. It was all kind of but I definitely always felt weird. My brother was, the golden child, not in my family per se. My parents loved both of us, whatever else. It was a very emotionally violent household and all that crap too, but whatever. But he was like the captain of the football team and the pitcher on the baseball team and the, homecoming king and all that. I was known as Kenny Haddad's little brother my entire youth. That was my name, right? Like
super hard though.
Yeah, which was a little rough, but I always felt separate from people. I always felt weird. I always wondered what was wrong. I always assumed everybody else was going through in their heads the same thing that I was going through, but they were better at dealing with it. Right. I always felt like, okay, there must be something wrong with me. I must suck in some way because all these other people are able to, sit in a chair all day and do their thing and not have to not just be vibrating all the time and get distracted by this and distracted by that and totally incapable. Like this is the thing I think parents need to understand. Who don't have ADHD themselves. It's not that your child doesn't want to do things that they're not interested in. It's that they can't, right? That brain simply does not. If people offer me large amounts of money to work on projects, then I'm just like, can't do it. Don't find it interesting. Don't want to. Not gonna spend my time doing it. If I try to force myself to do it, it's just not gonna happen. And that's a hard thing for people to understand. I remember my brother at one point would be like, "Why can't you just sit still?" And my answer was, "Why can't you fly?" Like you are asking me an absurd question. And also these days, what I say is, "Well, why can't you get up on stage in front of people for 2 hours and talk with no preparation about things just by having people do this? Or why can't you write a book in 2 days like I've done and then get it on Amazon and make it a bestseller in the niche that it's in and things like that?" So there are positive aspects to, again, it's not it's like I never like people saying it's like ADHD is something you have, right? That always kind of freaks me out because it's like, it's just a different brain. It's not an inferior brain. It's a different brain. A lot of the most brilliant people in the world that you can look back on throughout history who have had the biggest impact in the world have ADHD or things that are more severe than that, quote unquote. So.
You are 100% right there. And you actually, just talking about your brother, you told me a story at the conference about your brother coming to you years later and apologizing to you. Do you mind sharing that with listeners?
Oh man, that was one of the most, my brother, actually I would get a little teary eyed. I was chatting with my brother the other day over text while I was in England at a speaking thing at Oxford. And he was like, told me he was proud of me. And that was just like, oh my God, I've never heard that before in my life. But yeah, my brother, he's a great guy. I love my brother. We're very, very different people. He's much more kind of straight and narrow, does things the way that you're supposed to do them. I'm the weirdo who went off and did all this other kind of stuff. But our entire life, he's never gotten it. He never understood it. I think he always just thought I was lazy or faking it or making excuses or whatever. And with his brain being a lot more stable and a lot more normal, I get it. But he has a son, a lovely son. And when his son was born, his son has a bit of ADHD and a bit of Asperger's and a few other things. And being a dad to a kid who had he could convince himself that I, his little brother, was just a mess up and faking things or whatever. He couldn't do that with his kid. And so when he saw his son being a lot like me, being a lot like his little brother, I think that was a really big eye-opening experience for him. And then when I saw him a few years ago, when Blake was kind of diagnosed and dealing with that stuff, he came to me and he said, "Listen, man, I really want to apologize." And I was like, I did not believe you. I didn't get it. I thought you were just whatever. And now I get that it was a real thing and I'm really sorry. And that I'm getting teary eyed just thinking about it now. It was one of the most emotional things I've ever kind of dealt with. Because what I've wanted my entire life was my family to get it. Yeah. Right. It was for my brother to get it. But our dad died when I was 19 and my brother was 22, I think. And so having him be proud of me or understand what I was dealing with was always a big driving thing for me. It was a very emotional thing.
Wow. I mean, I'm teary-eyed just thinking about it. I get teary-eyed pretty much on a daily basis, when I'm talking to these families that, are struggling so much. And I know that, there are so many things out there that can help them overcome that struggle. And when you see them actually step out of that, it is very, very emotional. But just the fact that your brother, the acceptance, the understanding would have been.
It did a lot for our
monumental.
relationship. I'll tell you that.
Yeah,
right? Like
for sure.
We're still not super close, unfortunately, because we're different people. But the fact, that understanding and that feeling of respect, and also him understanding, it's been hard for me to get where I am, right?
Yep.
Like this was not just a thing I fell into. It wasn't like luck that I happen to have what I've managed to have in this life. It was a struggle. It's been a fight every freaking inch of the way. It's been a fight, and having him understand that has been really valuable and wonderful.
Awesome. It's amazing. And look, we all know that like caring for your mental health, for everyone, not just people with those extra challenges, is so important. What do you do to sort of care for your mental health?
I'm for the bipolar, I got put on medication, and that saved my life, quite honestly. I was within, people can talk about medication in positive and negative ways. I do think that children are over medicated in our country, especially for ADHD and things like that. And sometimes you just need it, right? So like I would be dead right now. I would be I would have killed myself 6 years ago. I was about 3 or 4 months from driving a knife into my chest when my wife finally convinced me that something was wrong, right? And she was the only one in the world that could have gotten through to me. And it was only because I was like, if I don't take this seriously, I'm going to lose my wife, and I can't do that. And that's what kind of get me to do it. I do a lot of yoga. I just spend a lot of my time kind of stretching, and I go for a lot of like 4-hour walks around the city and just spend time with I just try to keep my life pretty calm. I try to limit I don't always succeed, but I try to limit my drinking. I try to limit, any kind of extracurricular kind of thing. But it's just for me, it's just a lot of really paying attention to potential symptoms that something might be going wrong. And also, for the longest time, I tried to make myself do things I sucked at in my business and in my life, because you have that guilt, right? That feeling of like, oh, well, you have to, like, you suck at these things, but that's a bad thing. You have to do this, and you focus on what you suck at as opposed to what you're good at. Well, now I have a team, right? Mike Halakakis, who basically runs my business for me. We have a wonderful working relationship because there's a lot of respect that goes back and forth. And he knows that, he's going to tell me something 5 times and I'm going to forget it. And he knows that whatever else, but he also knows what I bring to the table, and that our business is built around me and my crazy brain, basically. And I know that he has the management experience to be able to run the company and the ability to kind of focus on these things. And I have an assistant who helps me with a lot of stuff as well. And it's great to be in this place where instead of beating myself up for what I suck at, I can just focus on what I'm really, really good at, what I'm one of the best in the world at. And for the kids who are, parents who are listening, most of the very successful people you've heard of have ADHD or something similar, right? Like all the geniuses you've ever heard of in business or whatever else had something going on. These are not normal people. These are not people who are content or able to just kind of sit still and deal with things. It's a joke when I go to masterminds, and I'm sure you've been to these too. It's a joke about how everybody in the room has ADHD.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Like it comes up every single time.
Oh, totally. I mean, when I went to the one that we were just at recently, people were like, "Oh, what do you do?" And I told them, they're like, "Oh my gosh," they were telling me their story about, how they were diagnosed at young, or their child was diagnosed. I could, I think I spoke to about over 10 people that were all touched by ADHD.
In one way or another, yeah. And there's the shame, the freaking shame of it, man. The shame of just I lived in shame for the longest time. That was I talk about shame in speeches I give now, and the emotionality of that and how it goes. But I just was constantly, Brene Brown, whom I'm sure you've heard of, that talks about, guilt is about what you did, and shame is about who you are. That blew my brain apart into like little tiny pieces when I read that, because I had lived in this feeling of inferiority and there's something wrong with you and you suck in all these ways, and just never being able to let go of anything I did wrong ever. And the rumination just going through your brain over and over and over and over and over again forever. It wasn't until I read Delivered from Distraction, which I'm sure you're aware of. That book also changed my life right there, man, because that was the first book that I read where I was like, oh my God, this is me. This is my brain. This is that motorcycle in your brain. That was what it for me that kind of woke me up.
It was the Ferrari. It was was it the Ford with the Ferrari?
Yeah.
It was a car analogy of like having a Ferrari, engine with like Ford brakes or something like that. So
exactly. And just that speed and just the racing thoughts all the time, and the ideas that, like, for me at least, it's been interesting since I've kind of gotten in a more stable place. I've had to relearn how to work, right? Because ideas used to be a thing that happened to me. Creativity was a thing that happened to me against my will, quite honestly, right? I would be sitting there and just be this, and this. And now I have to actually make myself think about these things. It's been quite an adjustment to learn how to do that, to learn how to be more specific. And I don't even know, I'm lacking the word that I'm getting here. Instead of just having like the assault of things, then going to my desk and just getting it all out in like an hour and then running away because it felt torturous the entire time.
Oh yeah, I can't even imagine. So how did you stumble upon your superpower of copywriting?
Like I said, I got fired from every job I ever had, and I felt like a horrible, worthless person because of it. And the last job I got fired from, I was writing greeting cards here in Seattle for $24,000 a year. It was my first ever writing job.
Wow.
And the way I've always been a good writer, and I've always been creative, but the way I grew up, I've never met a professional writer until I was well into my college years. Like I didn't know any journalists. I didn't know anybody, any like book writer. I'd never met anybody who was like, this is a way you can actually make a living my entire life. And so I kept trying to just force myself to do whatever. I moved to LA and I did a bunch of production assistant stuff, and then got fired from that job. And they had moved me to Seattle to work in the Seattle office. They wanted to make me into a project manager, which is the most hilarious thing in the world. Looking back on it now, that is not who I am. And then I got laid off from that gig. And then I spent a couple of years doing like just random temp work around Seattle, making, $10,000 a year and kind of getting by on that. And then I got this job writing greeting cards, and I did that for 9 months. And then I got laid off from that as well. And I just went to my car in the parking lot and cried, because I was 25 probably at that point, and my brother was off in New York City making a couple $100,000 a year doing finance stuff, and I was just a screw up. I couldn't do anything. And I went to a career counselor who I could not afford her $90 fee, so she cut me a break for only charged me $50, which I barely had. And she asked me at one point, she said, well, what's your ambition? Where do you want to be in 5 years? The standard thing. And I was like, if I can just make $45,000 a year as a writer, I'd be happy. That was as big as I could possibly dream. And she recommended this whole copywriting thing. And I was like, what's that? I don't really understand what that is or what it is. My dad was a salesman, though, a really, really good one before he passed away. And so that's kind of in the genes to a certain degree. And I spent 3 years doing corporate type copy, writing for Microsoft and Washington Mutual, and not doing that well with it. And then at one point, I kind of stumbled into the direct response world, which is the junk mail world, as it were, or the whatever else. And I had a lot of prejudice against it. I was like, who the hell reads this stuff? This is scammy, whatever else. But when I got past that, and I actually allowed myself to learn the psychology behind it, and the fact that you got to sell things for people to buy things. Like it just has to kind of happen there. And yes, you can use these powers for evil, but you can always use them for good. But then I started to write a little bit, and I got a few clients that a mentor of mine hooked me up with. And all of a sudden I was good at something. All of a sudden people were treating me like I'd been doing this for years, even though I'd been doing it for months. And I had a couple of things. The great thing about direct response and marketing in general is nobody's opinion matters, right? Like my opinion doesn't matter. Your opinion doesn't matter. All that matters is, did it convert or not? Right? Did you hit the target or not? Did people take out their wallets and buy something or not? And so all of a sudden I had something where, as much as my brain was telling me I sucked, the numbers didn't say that, right? So I either had to try to convince myself that reality was wrong, or accept the fact that I was actually good at something. I was actually had the capability to be at the top of this kind of thing. And then, and again, because of my crazy brain is why I got where I did, right? Like if you ask people in our business who one of the most creative copywriters is, they'll say me. And the people that are able to bring the most drama into it, they will say me as well. And that's because I do not have that standard, bog standard kind of run of the mill brain. So the torture can be a gift sometime if you allow it to be. But yeah, then it's just, I just kind of fell into it full force. I became a total narcissist for a while about it, by the way, with the bipolar thing being undiagnosed. And all of a sudden I was getting told by people on a regular basis, hey, you are one of the best there has ever been at this. And then when I did the Michael Fiore thing and was going on the Rachel Ray show and being like a celebrity in some way, that was profound narcissism fuel that took me a long time to get past. But I will always remember that feeling of being good at something. Actually, the first time I ever really felt that I could be a writer was when I wrote for a thing here in Seattle called 1448, the world's quickest theater festival. And I'd acted in it before or whatever, but I never written for it. And I wrote a play called Five Guys, 10-minute play that was put on. And it was about five guys, five very, very straight guys who go watch Brokeback Mountain together and what happens from there. And they end up at Neighbors on Capitol Hill, the gay club, like dancing with their shirts off and crazy stuff happens. And being in the audience and having it just kill, right? Just like, it was the last one of the night. And it just, I wrote it on a Thursday. It was up on Friday, right? Like that's what that whole thing is about. And sitting in that audience and just having people laughing their asses off and having people I respected come up to me afterwards and say, wow, that was really, really good. I mean, I hated myself, right? Like I thought I was a total worthless, whatever. That's what my brain was telling me all the time. So that I will always remember that as one of the most profound moments of my life. And then the first time I had a sales letter or something like that I did, that did well, that was profound as well. I mean, those moments, I will say that moment in the theater watching that thing, that means more to me than times that I've made hundreds of thousands of dollars in a day. Mm-hmm.
Wow. I mean, Chris, I could literally sit here and listen to you for hours.
Well, thank you. I could. Sure, I can talk for another gift of ADHD. I can literally talk forever. So, yeah.
Well, I'm going to ask you, I don't want to keep you forever, but I'm going to ask you, what's one piece of advice that you would give to parents who have a child with ADHD?
Love them for what they are and not what you want them to be. There's nothing wrong with them. There's nothing wrong with them. You know, if our society was built differently, they'd be shaman and they'd be hunters and they'd be running around all day and they would be accepted and loved for what they are. But we've been around forever, right? It's not like ADHD is something that has kind of appeared in humanity in the last few years. Maybe it's worse because of, iPhones and whatever. I don't really know. But people like us have existed forever. And we're honestly the ones that push the world forward. We're the ones that create art. We're the ones who come up with great scientific ideas. Most of the famous people who have really caused profound and lasting change in the world that you will think of had some level of ADHD or some other kind of atypical brain. And it sucks to deal with. I mean, I have friends who have children who are very ADHD and it can be infuriating and you pull your hair out and whatever, but there's nothing wrong with them. They're just different. It's like, you ever hear of aphantasia? Do you know what that is?
No.
I discovered that this is a thing about my brain recently, and I was like, oh my God, look at that. Aphantasia basically means you can't visually imagine things, right? Okay. So like my entire life, you go to yoga and they're like, okay, just imagine, picture an apple in your head. And I always thought they were being metaphorical, right? I was like, what do you mean? It turns out there are actually people who can picture an apple in their head or they can remember somebody's face. Yeah.
I have never been able to visualize either. And I thought that I was the weird one. And
it's about 5% of the population just can't do it. Right. And so I always thought I always like everybody I talk to who you're having the same experience that I did, right? Where you're like, I didn't think they meant that literally, but you talk to people and they'll be like I know what my wife looks like, but I could not. I can get like a flash for like a millisecond of what she looks like in my head. I know what she looks like when I see her. Obviously, I love that woman more than anything in the world, but I can't hold an image of pretty much anything in my head. And I hate when people are like, and neither like Ed Catmull, who's one of the biggest directors at Pixar, has this as well, or deals with this as well. And when people say they have aphantasia, I'm like, you don't have anything. You have a different kind of brain, right? And the upside to aphantasia is an ability to weather trauma in a much easier way than people that do have it. Because, I was abused when I was 6 years old by the paper boy down the street. I know that happened. I can't picture it. And man, isn't that nice? Right? So I just think when all of these things, whatever you're dealing with, bipolar, schizophrenia, whatever it is, there's nothing wrong with you. It's just a different kind of brain. And there's ups and there's downs to it. And the costs might be severe, but at least you get something back in return.
Wow. I mean, that's amazing. I'm sorry, I'm speechless. I just, not only for that piece of advice, but what you've just shared with me about aphantasia.
No, you're going to look it up right after this and you're going to be like, oh my God, what?
I would lie there and then you'd say, close your eyes and imagine that you're walking on a beach. And I'm like, all I see is black. Like oh my God.
But here's the deal too. Actually, here's a really interesting thing. I had somebody once tell me, Chris, your writing is so visual. And I said, you're wrong. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, go read it. And they're like, I'm like, you will notice I never use any visual language at all in what I'm writing. I never describe what people look like. I never say a color, unless, maybe occasionally I do, but it's a really rare thing. It's not how I think. The upside of that is I'm known for being incredibly, I see the world in emotion, basically, right?
Yeah.
Like that's kind of how I kind of see things and how I see people. When I describe somebody, I won't describe them as being 6 foot tall and blah, blah, blah. I'll say they're like a soccer mom who used to be in shape, but isn't anymore and is worried that her husband doesn't want to have sex with her anymore. And blah, like that's just how I kind of see things. And that's been a wonderful gift to me in some ways. So again, it's not wrong. It's not better or worse. It's just different. There's ups and there's downs. If I could change the aphantasia thing, would I? I don't really know. I don't mind. It's kind of nice just being able to close my eyes and not see anything sometimes. My brain is active enough. Oh my God. If my brain was as active as it was when I was younger
and visual.
and there were freaking with the rumination where I could not forgive myself for anything ever. I would have things that I did when I was 7, 8, 10 years old that would come back into my brain and I would feel just as guilty and just as much shame as I did then. If I could see it as well in my head, that would have been, a multiple worse. So.
For sure. No, definitely. We've learned a lot from you today, Chris, and I think that your story is incredible. Your success is incredible, but also your journey is pretty incredible.
It's been a ride, that's for sure.
Yeah, it sounds.
It's funny because when you live, no matter who you are, you live your life and you're just like, well, yeah, that's my life, whatever. Then you like to tell the story. One really quick thing. When I gave that "If I Wasn't Rich, I'd Be Dead" speech a few years ago at a copywriting conference, because I'm a celebrity, I'm a quote unquote celebrity in that world, right? So they want to know. And I'm up on stage and you've seen me speak. I'm funny. I really try to engage with the audience. I talk to the audience a lot and I take a lot of pride in that. And I work really hard to do a good job. It's important to me. And I'm used to getting feedback and seeing smiles and all those things in the audience. And I thought I was dying up there because I had some really good jokes about that time I almost tried to kill myself. And that other time that the story about Hillary Swank trying to hit me with a frying pan because I broke into her house because her parrot invited me to. It's a good story. But either way, I thought I was dying up there because nobody was laughing. And then later they were like, oh, it was really funny, but we didn't know if we were allowed to laugh because you were talking about horrible things the entire time.
Well,
you just let it go. Yeah.
When you were talking, I was like laughing and I'm like turning around. I'm like, why isn't anyone laughing? Because I was just like, you were hilarious. Absolutely hilarious.
Thank you.
One more thing before we go. And that is, what advice would you give a child who has ADHD?
Be kind to yourself, man. Be kind to yourself. I wish I could go back and I've studied hypnosis a little bit, and there's some therapeutic hypnosis stuff where you basically have the current you go back and meet the child version of you and embrace the child version of you. And I always tell people, it's like, listen, you might like, would you treat that 6-year-old the way you treat you now? Of course you wouldn't. You would never treat a child the way that we treat ourselves and the way that we judge ourselves for whatever else. But for the kids, be kind to yourself. There's nothing wrong with you. It's hard. I know what it's like in there, and it's horrible and it's difficult, and you try as hard as you can. You're dealing with people who are wondering why, like my brother would say, why can't you just sit still? There's nothing wrong with you. You're going to have to work a little bit harder, but at least you're getting, I couldn't get help when I was a kid, right? Nobody in the only kid that got diagnosed ADHD in my school was this kid, James Bent, who was way more than ADHD. I mean, I still know the guy. He's a good guy, but he was way out there in this way. But you had to be that severe to get any kind of help at all. My parents, it never dawned on my parents to bring me to talk to anybody. Like, why would it? That's just not a thing that was done. So it is a positive that it's a positive that you have parents who care enough to be trying, to be listening to a podcast like this, to be reading books like Delivered from Distraction, which I think every kid who has ADHD or has anything like it should read. But be kind to yourself, and it is possible to you can have a great life. You can have a successful life. You can have a life where, it's amazing to me. I was just in London. I was in England for a week, and I went to Oxford University to speak at a conference. And when I go to these things, people treat me with profound respect, right? Profound respect. People literally get nervous to come up and talk to me, and which is a strange thing to deal with. And I'm luckily not full of myself enough to think it actually means anything, but it means something to them, right? And feeling that, and after living a life where I felt like I sucked for so long is amazing. And it is possible to get there. I promise you, most of your heroes who you would think are like these big deals out in the world are dealing with something similar. Normal people don't change the world.
No, they don't. And that's for sure. And, it's great that there are parents out there that are listening to podcasts like this, are reading those books for their children, are, helping their children eat better and reduce inflammation in their body and thrive and get them the help that they need. And Chris, this has been amazing. I just want to thank you so much for sharing everything that you've shared today, your knowledge, your personal experience. Please tell listeners where they can find and follow you online.
Yeah, I've got a podcast where I talk to people about marketing and copywriting, and it always veers off into crazy other stuff. I very purposely, it is different than any marketing show you've ever heard before, because it's me. Originally, I was going to call it Balls Deep with Chris Haddad, but not because I thought it'd be funny, but also it's because I want to go deep with people. I want to have friends of mine they always joke, Chris doesn't do small talk, because I don't. I don't even know how. It doesn't even occur to me. I'm not like, hey, did you see that movie the other day? I'm like, so tell me about that thing that happened when you were 9. Like, I just can't help myself but do it. So if you go to thechrishaddad.com or Chris Haddad Show, HADDAD, and then I'm on Facebook. The only social media I really do is Facebook. I have people that put other things on other things for me occasionally. But if you just go to Facebook, it's facebook.com/Chris.Haddad. You'll find me. Follow me there. Especially if you're like a crazy right-wing conspiracy theorist, because I will mock you viciously over and over again until you cry. It's one of my favorite things in the world. Just so
amazing. But also, we've got a lot of mums listening to the podcast, and I'd love you to share your stories that you have put out there, your love stories.
Which ones? Which stories? My Michael Fiore stuff.
Yes.
My Michael Fiore stuff. Oh yeah, well, I've written a bunch of books as Michael Fiore for relationship advice. So I give a lot of that stuff. I also did write up a smut novel that nobody knows that I wrote, that is out there in the world somewhere, and it's quite good and it's really fun. As I say, I am probably the world's only and first sexting millionaire. Like, that's how I got my wife and my house, basically. So it's always kind of a fun thing to say. But I am known for I know how to write that stuff. So if you're into that kind of stuff, go check it out. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you once again for joining me. Listeners, thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of The Soaring Child. This was a different one, but it was amazing. And I'm Dana Kay, your ADHD health practitioner. Keep on thriving. Thank you for listening to the Soaring Child podcast today. To learn more about how to help your child with ADHD soar using natural strategies, visit our website at ADHDthriveinstitute.com and follow us on social media at ADHD Thrive Institute.